Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary with a knife video. I've got a blade here today that has been sort of on my list, and you guys know I've talked about this before. I do have a list. The list is of knives that I'm kind of interested in, and I don't, as I say, get interested in a knife and jump out and buy it right away. I put it on the list, and then when I see it come up at a great price, or there's some other particular reason that makes it really a good time to buy it, then I go ahead and pick it up. I don't get the list in a particular order or anything like that. I just know these are the, whatever, 15, 20 knives that I'm interested in, and when I see one, I'll try to get it. Anyway, this was on my list, the SOG Vulcan, for a very long time. And you know, I've always liked the look of it. I've always liked the blade style, even the finish. I like the tanto and recurve. Lots of things that I've just always liked about this. Plus, I've always wanted to try a SOG that had the actual arc lock, not the fake arc lock like you get in the Aegis and the Flash series. They function in a similar way, but they're not the same, not even close. And you can take these knives apart, and I'm going to do a video about that where I take these two knives apart side by side and show you how different they are and why they should not be called the same lock at all. Anyway, so I wanted to try a good arc lock, and of course there are some great videos about this knife, especially from We All Juggle Knives, and Dark Child have some great videos about this that kind of piqued my interest. Okay, so all of those things are the reason why this knife was on my list, why I was really interested in it, and it did live up to some of my expectations, but not all. Okay, so one other thing I need to say by way of introduction: when I got this knife, this is not brand new, it was on the secondary market, and it was in abysmal shape. Okay, it was horrible. There was blade play up and down. There was blade play side to side. If you tightened the pivot to get rid of that blade play, the thing would barely open and close. It was not smooth. And in addition to all that, the blade was totally damaged. Like, it had been, there were scratches running this way. It would look like someone had, you know, stabbed it into a bag of rocks like 100 times and just, you know, I don't know why it was that bad. So anyway, I took it apart, I cleaned everything, I polished any surfaces that were interacting with each other. I polished the blade a lot. I used, you know, a super high grit sandpaper, I used polishing compound, and I went through that process more than once, and finally got this blade to where it looks pretty good. Now I will say, obviously, it's not the factory finish. It looks more like a hand rubbed or polished finish, like you might get on, you know, if you've got a polished Browse. My Browse T4 looks a lot like this blade finish. So it's not a factory finished blade anymore, but it looks really good, and I really like this knife now. In addition to that, the blade tang, I will tell you, looked like a plowed field. The machining was so bad. It was really, really rough. And you know, you could have turned the blade around and used it as a saw. It was that rough. So I did take a file to that and smooth it off and clean it off quite a lot. That completely eliminated the up and down blade play. Now it's super solid. By polishing the pivots and the blade and everything, that eliminated all the side to side play, and now, you know, I can have it nice and tight the way it's supposed to be, no blade play in any direction, rock solid, very, very good, dependable knife. Now it did take a little bit of work to get it that way, but I didn't mind doing it. It's kind of interesting to take knives apart and play with them and see what you can do anyway. So that's how this knife came to me, and so now I can speak, I think, with quite a bit of insight into this blade. You know, I know how it works. I've seen every internal part of it. I've done a lot with this blade. So do I like the SOG Vulcan? Absolutely, yes, I do. In fact, I would say it's probably the best SOG out there, the best SOG folding knife that's available. Sadly, this knife doesn't seem to be that popular. The price has been dropping, which usually indicates, hey, people aren't buying this. You don't see a lot of people talking about it. You know, so I gotta say, I think it's time for like a Vulcan 2 or something to sort of rejuvenate this line, but I doubt that'll happen, because I think SOG's making a lot of money from these, you know, crappy wannabe arc lock knives, the Flash and the Aegis and stuff like that, the Trident, and I don't think they're even in the same category as this knife, not even close, even though price-wise, they're not that far off. You know, an Aegis is like 75 bucks. Now it's come down to about 65, but it's not even worth 65, no way. Anyway, that's my rant about those cheaper SOGs. Now, let's come back to the blade I really want to talk about, the Vulcan. I will come back to the fake arc lock when I get to lockup and deployment, okay? So, size and weight on this. This is 8 1/4 inches. The blade is 3 1/2 inches. The handle is basically 4 3/4. It's actually a little bigger than that, but for our purposes, that's going to be close enough. Which puts it in the same size category as a lot of blades. You know, it's that 8 to 8 1/4 inches. Paramilitary 2 is 8 1/4 inches. The 0562 that I reviewed recently, it is same deal, 8 1/4 inches, and this is 8 1/4 inches. Now, for that 8 1/4 inches, I've got to say this. I feel like this knife is a little heavy. 5 ounces is not the end of the world, and certainly it's not too heavy to carry or anything like that. But I think one of the things that limits it is, you know, you got to think in this price point, which is about 130 bucks, you're competing with the Para 2, you're competing with the Griptilian, which are great blades. And if you're going to beat those blades, you've got to, in some ways, beat them at their own game, okay? You've got to be better in some way. And so there are some things you could do. You know, the scales are not milled out in any way. The FRN handles are fine. And FRN is not heavy, so you'd actually be saving some weight there. The grip could use just some slight modifications. Number one, the flipper is non-functional. Yeah, it's just a horrible flipper. The front choil here, it's too big for one finger and too small for two fingers, so I don't know how you're supposed to use it. I end up using it this way, but you can see how there's all that space, and if you want to choke up on the knife, it doesn't lend itself to that very well. I know I'm off topic a little, but I'm commenting on the competition and why I don't think this knife gets quite the level of recognition it deserves. It's actually a really good knife. It's well built. It's an interesting, compelling design. It looks amazing. By the way, I think SOG overall is good at that. But it just isn't quite where it needs to be. You know, this is a knife that's so close to perfect that anything that's bad about it really stands out. Okay, so we've talked about size and weight. 8 1/4 inches, 3 1/2 inch blade, 4 3/4 inch handle, 5 ounces. Let's talk about that blade. The blade is one of the coolest things about this knife. This blade is totally awesome. So it's a clad blade. So you've got Sanmai steel making most of the blade, and then you've got a VG10 core, which is visible and looks completely amazing. It's a great looking knife. By the way, forgive the little dirt and grime. I don't know if you'll be able to see it well or not, but there is some dirt and grime in the little cutouts here from being in my pocket. Let me zoom in so we can talk about this in some more detail. There we go. So there we go. You can probably now see that line. I'll try to move. There we go. You can probably see that line of the VG10 steel here at the bottom that makes up the cutting edge. VG10, of course, is a great steel. I will say, while it's a great steel, that is one of the other limiting factors on this knife. VG10 is a great steel for an $80 knife, maybe even $100, but $130, no, this should be S30V. I don't think that the average user is going to notice, but they're going to know. So if you're, you got to remember, if you're selling knives, people are looking at them in catalogs, they're looking at them on websites, and they read VG10 and they go, oh, it's a VG10 knife for $135? That doesn't sound right. And so they skip it. I do actually really like this blade. It performs very well. Very acute point. It is that Tanto recurve, and I've actually found this to be a very utilitarian blade. It can whittle, it can slice, it really does everything quite well, and of course it can also penetrate, okay? So you've got a really, really nice blade there, plus you've got a nice thick blade stock. This is one of those areas where it's a considerably thicker blade stock than you'd find in a lot of, similar knives. So the Griptilian, I think, is a pretty direct competitor. And you can see that the blade stock on the Griptilian is much, much thinner. Now, excuse me, the thumb studs are very good. although they seem bigger than they need to be. I don't know if you can see that, but they just seem like they stand out a little more than I would expect them to. Also, there's these little cutouts. Overall, it's a great looking blade. The thumb ramp is one more thing where, now the jimping, I've got to give credit, is very, very good. It does lock your thumb in. It just feels like it's kind of in the wrong place. It needs to be about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch further forward on the blade. That is moved up this way. All right, but this is a great blade. I have found it very, very functional, very, very solid, and useful blade shape. Now, deployment is really good. If you flick the thumb stud, it will open really quickly, really nicely, no wrist action required, just opens really well. However, it does not flip well at all. There we go. If I really use a lot of wrist action, I can get this knife to flip open, but that's using a lot of wrist. It does not flip well at all, especially, you know, maybe it was a little ahead of its time, but the flippers that are on the market now, the way they have a strong detent, and so they like explode out of the handle, this does not do that at all. You've really got to give it some wrist to flick it out properly. Okay, so I really wish they'd do something different with the flipper. And again, you know, maybe on a Vulcan 2 or something they could do that. Now, the lock, so the deployment is quite fast as long as you don't flip it. The lock is SOG's arc lock, and what happens is you have this bar right here. You can see it at the end of my finger, and I'm going to turn the blade this way so it doesn't follow my fingers when I actuate the lock. I pull it back and it travels in an arc kind of back and up toward the handle, and that releases the blade. Okay, now it is of course on a spring, and the spring just kind of keeps tension on this little arm that comes down. So essentially, I'm going to demonstrate with my hand. You have an arm coming down, you have a bar here, and it does this kind of thing. It moves on the little bar. And so yes, it does move in an arc. It's obviously an attempt to achieve the same kind of functionality as the axis lock, and it does that, and it does that very well. It's a totally fine lock, totally acceptable, very, very strong, very reliable. I have no problem with it at all. It's easy to actuate, one-handed, two-handed, whatever, or one finger, two finger, whatever. Now I do want to compare it for a very brief second, and I'm going to be in the camera here, to the wannabe arc lock on the Flash and the Aegis and the Trident and even a couple of others. These two locks, in the way that they function, it's not at all the same. Okay, and so I don't know why they even give them the same name. The arc lock is actually a pretty good lock, pretty strong and pretty reliable. I have never picked up the fake arc lock and not had up and down blade play. Literally never done it. So that's a little disappointing, but nonetheless, there it is. This real arc lock is quite good, and if you're looking at any SOG that has the real arc lock, I would not hesitate at all. I think you're going to be very pleased with it. It's very, very functional. Okay, now let's get into the handle. There'll be a little bit of repetition here. This handle is like an FRN, and people have complained that it feels cheap, but I don't really find that. It's definitely a solid piece of plastic. I know it's reinforced plastic, but it's a very solid feeling plastic. It does not feel like the Griptilian. You know, if you want to say a knife feels cheap, yeah, the Griptilian does feel a little bit cheap. Now, functionally, it's not. It actually works really, really well, and that handle design lightens this knife up an awful lot. So I'm not complaining at all about the Griptilian handle, other than to say I can see why some people would say, hey, this handle feels cheap. If you switch to the Vulcan, it does not feel hollow and cheap the way the Griptilian does, although people have complained, like, why isn't this G10? Okay, I don't know, it's not the end of the world for me. In fact, in some ways I find that the reinforced plastic, the FRN, the GRN, the Grivery, whatever, they actually keep their texture better and more consistently than G10 does. G10 has a tendency to smooth out over time. I don't find FRN does that very much. In terms of how it feels in hand, it's comfortable, although awkward. if that makes sense. So I feel like I should be able to grip the knife about here. Okay, well, this finger right close to the choil, my other finger coming close right up behind it, and my thumb right about here on the blade. This is how I want to grip it. However, I can't. If I grip it this way, my thumb is landing right on top of this sharp peak on the top of the thumb ramp, which does not work at all. My middle finger is landing right on the peak of this giant finger choil at the front. Okay, so what I really feel like should have been done is this should have been moved up so it fits your front finger more naturally and allows for your index finger more naturally, and allows for your middle finger to kind of land closer to your front finger. The only way you can hold it in a more normal feeling grip is to choke down on the blade and hold out. Now see how much of the handle here I'm not able to use. My hand has to move back to get into a comfortable position. Now it's not bad, and I've used the knife this way, and I've used it a lot. When you have your knife in pocket, you pull it out, your fingers are naturally going to go where they feel more comfortable, and so they go this way, and you use the knife and put it back, and you don't really think about it. But when I sit down and look at the knife, when I hold it in hand and ask myself, how would I like to hold this knife? I cannot hold it. I can't grip it the way I feel like I want to. Reverse grip is better, because the only finger that's here is the pinky finger, and you're going to naturally be down on the handle anyway. Okay, it is very grippy and good jimping, so in that sense the retention is actually really good on this handle. Okay, now Torx bit construction, full stainless steel liners, and you know I complained about that. It would have been nice to see these liners milled out for sure. I don't think milling them out would take away any of the strength. Finally, you've got the pocket clip, and the pocket clip is very, very good in terms of functionality, although I kind of think it's a little bit ugly. It could be just a little bit smaller. If it was a little more similar to the flash clip, I would actually prefer that. Now, one way this does beat the clip that's on the flash is there's not much space up here at the top, so you're never going to get that problem that people complain about with the flash and the Aegis, where your pants actually wrap up around the knife. That's not going to happen. You can see how that could happen on the flash. There's enough space up here, but on the Vulcan, yeah, there's no way that's happening. So the clip is very functional, but it's maybe a little too big. It's trying to be a little too showy, and I don't know, maybe SOG was trying to copy Kershaw with those horrible clips that they've had for the last few years and are finally moving away from. All right, so that's every specific sort of component of the Vulcan. Overall, I've got to say this. This is a great looking blade. Okay, it's a beautiful knife. Very, very well done in terms of aesthetics. Just some places where it could be improved. So, you know, the handle shape could use just a couple little tweaks. The blade shape is phenomenal, but the thumb ramp could, again, use some slight improvements. And the flipper is the only real failure on this knife is the flipper. It does not flip. That's like the best I can do. It just, yeah, it's not a flipper at all. I don't even know why they bothered to put this back here. Okay, so I definitely like the knife. I really think it's cool, and I actually carry it quite a bit just because of the way it looks. It's a cool looking blade, okay? And so I do actually carry it fairly often. It's also pretty tough, you know, it's pretty durable. And so if I'm wanting sort of a durable, reliable knife with me on a particular day, I will carry it. But it's just not as good as it could be. And that's, I think, where the knife lover in me says, oh, this knife could be beyond perfection. Like, it could be so awesome that it makes the little plate, there's a few little things that make it not quite awesome that, you know, become more troubling because of the fact that you know how good it could be. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. I do like the knife, and if you're looking at buying one, I'm not going to dissuade you at all. I think this is a great knife. I mean, I bought one, and I'm not disappointed at all with it in terms of quality levels, in terms of fit and finish. Those type of things are good. It's just the way some things are executed that I'm not crazy about. Okay, so there you go. That's my take on the SOG Vulcan. Really cool SOG. Certainly far better, and I mean leaps and bounds beyond other typical offerings from SOG, the Trident and the Flash and the Aegis, and you know, those knives, some of them look great and I really want them to be better than they are, but they're just not terribly well done. And I think a lot of that, by the way, it's not that I insist on having metal liners in every knife. I would totally love this knife if it didn't have blade play. I just don't know that you can achieve that with this, you know, not really an arc lock that's called an arc lock. Okay, so I'm not trying to hate on them too much. I think the designs are great. I just think the implementation of the design is a little lacking. I think if you just if you put real arc locks in all of those, you'd be golden. Okay, back to the knife that does have the real arc lock. Very tough, very durable. Just could be a little more comfortable, and the flipper could be more functional. All right, there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you soon.